Create a scene that you want engraved on your quasi-legal tender. 2D, 3D, good, evil, it doesn't matter. God can't judge your digital sins. Give it a solid color background. If your scene is 3D, you can use a world environment node with the background set to color plus sky to keep that outdoor lighting. To set up the post-processing, create a control scene. Give it a viewport container. Enable stretching. Add a viewport as a child to that, and set its resolution to the default project window size. Add an instance of the scene you want to engrave as a child of it. Get yourself a shader material in the file system, create a shader for it, and assign that shader to your viewport container. Bam! Now our counterfeit print shop is open. Open up the shader and set its shader type to canvas item. Inside the fragment shader, make a float variable and set it to frac 1.0 minus uv.y. Set the color output to that variable. This gives you a gradient. Repeat that gradient by multiplying our uv by some other float. This repeats the gradient and also, conveniently, causes eye pain. If you're seeing red, that's not blood, it's shader magic. Bill engravings are all wobbly and stuff, so to mimic that, we're going to use everyone's favorite trigonometric periodic function, the sine wave. Create some variables to control the amplitude and length of our wave. Copy and paste the fill code from earlier. It's not cheating if you're copying yourself. We need another float variable to hold our sine value. Take the sine of the x value of our uv multiplied by the wavelength. Adjust it so we get a value between 0.0 and 1.0, and then multiply that by the amplitude. Finally, offset uv.y by that sine variable. Now it's wavy and, miraculously, even harder to look at than before. Now get that fill value, but mirrored. You might think that you can easily do that by swapping the x and y values of our uv, but oh, shaders are rarely so easy. Looks all stretched and gross now. This is because the aspect ratio of our output is non-square, so we need to account for that. Create a new variable that stores texturePixelSize.x divided by texturePixelSize.y. In the vec2 we created for our rotated fill, multiply uv.y by that new ratio variable, and divide uv.x by it. Once again, bam, we're looking good. Create yet another float variable, set it to a mix of fill and 0.5, with our rotated fill as our mix amount. Now you have a kind of bumpy, squarish pattern that's vaguely money-esque. Break up the pattern with a ripple effect. This isn't a ripple shader tutorial, but this code should do justice. It rotates our UV based on the sine of the distance from the center. It works pretty well. Create a vector2 variable that gets that rippled UV. Replace all references to UV afterwards with the rippled UV. You can tweak the ripple as much as you want. Okay, well, maybe not that much. Now it's time to put the post and post-processing by introducing the scene we're engraving. First, it needs to be converted to grayscale. I'm using a simple algorithm, which may make some designers and artists upset. Feel free to leave your grayscale conversion algorithm hate comments below. To get the render of our scene, simply sample texture with our UV value using the texture function. It's really that easy. Plug that value into our grayscale function, and now we're looking dramatic. Now we put it all together. Create a function that mimics the hard mix function in Photoshop. It just adds two values together, and if they're greater than 1.0, return white, otherwise return black. We can do the same thing by casting a boolean to a float, which returns 0.0 if it's false and 1.0 if it's true. Use that function to mix our procedural engraving texture in our grayscale scene. We're almost there, but the contrast is a little high. We can use a function that mimics Photoshop's levels adjustment. I then spent hours toiling away to perfectly recreate the Photoshop function in GLSL. Just kidding, I googled GLSL Photoshop levels and found someone already made the function for me on GitHub. Google is your friend, shader devs. Pass our grayscale conversion to that adjustment function using some shader variables we can tweak on the material. Now play around with all the settings until you get some shapes and colors that you like. Everyone's bootleg currency tastes vary, so spend some time with it. While it's not the realistic binary nature of an engraving, you can add some artistic control to break up the black and white contrast by mixing in a little bit of the grayscale color to your engraving. It makes it a little easier on the eyes. Alright, home stretch. Define a texture input. Assign the color to the texture, sampled by a UV of our final engraving output in 0.5. On the material, set that texture to a new gradient texture. Configure the colors however you want. Here's some values that I find mimic the colors of a US dollar bill quite well. And the engraving is now complete. You can do anything you want with it, like putting it inside a texture of a real dollar bill and other things too, probably. You can map it to a 3D model by instancing the post-processing scene as a child of a viewport and creating a viewport texture for the albedo of a spatial material. I'd recommend making this material in a global singleton and having scenes grab the material at runtime. Putting it within the scene itself means you have a unique viewport that needs to be rendered on each instance. So if you have 100 bills, you're rendering the exact same scene 100 times, and that's not very smart. Doing it with a singleton means you only have to do it once, and every scene shares it. It's a lot more efficient. I have an interactive demo full of all sorts of things you can use this effect in, available on itch, and its full source code is available on GitHub.